And as you point out, Democrats picked up a stunning victory in a special election runoff for a Texas Senate seat. Taylor Ramett flipped the solidly red Senate District 9, which represents Fort Worth and surrounding suburbs, defeating Republican Lee Wamsgans by 14 points. President Trump won this district by 17 points back in 2024. This is in part of Tarrant County, where no Democrat has won a state Senate seat since 1978. When asked yesterday about the race last night, President Trump claimed he didn't know anything about it. But as you can see here, he had posted in support of Wamsgans 3 separate times on social media in the 2 days leading up to the Saturday election. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis wrote on social media that special elections are quirky and not necessarily projectable, but he acknowledged that a swing of this magnitude is not something that can be dismissed. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board.
Hey folks, welcome back. Dr. John is here. So what just happened, guys? A Democrat just flipped a Texas state Senate seat in suburban Fort Worth that Republicans had held since 1991. Over 30 years of unbroken dominance in a district Trump won by 17 points just months ago. Not a swing district, not a toss-up, a Republican birthright. That kind of result in that kind of place doesn't just signal trouble.
Is writing about this in a piece entitled Texas Election Jolt to the GOP, and it reads in part, quote, "How does a Republican lose by 14 points in a safe, conservative Texas state Senate seat that President Trump carried by 17 points in 2024? Answer: when there's a voter backlash against the Trump administration, notably its mass deportation debacles. State politics is often national these days, and the 31-point vote swing in a little more than 14 months can only be explained as part of a rising tide of opposition to Mr. Trump's first year and a sour public mood. Immigration enforcement that turns ugly in the streets is turning off the swing voters who will determine who wins the race for Congress this year. It is a staggering win. You notice that some Republicans are taking note. We heard from Rand Paul on 60 Minutes last night. But will more Senate Republicans realize that this is something they need to take a stand on?
That's like you're asking the question.
I know.
Will Republicans realize that hitting themselves in the forehead with a ball-peen hammer causes their forehead to hurt? I mean, it's this obvious.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm going to hit myself with a ball-peen hammer again. That hurts. Well, it's quirky. It's not projectable. So I'm going to hit myself in the head with a ball-peen hammer again. No, it hurts. It hurts every time. And like I've said, I'm trying to help the Republicans. I'm trying to help you help yourself.
Yeah.
I'm trying to let me help you. You won't listen. And so what's happening? Well, staying with the Jerry Maguire theme, well, voters are showing Democrats the votes. And J-Mart, we've been doing this a long time.
It signals that the ground Republicans thought was solid is gone. Trump personally endorsed the Republican candidate. He branded her a true MAGA warrior. He fired off last-minute messages urging his supporters to flood the polls and deliver victory. He was all over this race, fully invested, publicly committed, visibly attached to the outcome. And she lost. Not by a whisker, not in a nail-biter that required recounts and legal challenges.
Maybe that's why I'm so fired up for having to get up on this
I hadn't
cold
noticed.
morning. But we've been doing this a long enough time to realize that, first of all, off-year elections like Virginia, landslide, like a New Jersey landslide, like the California referendum, like the Wisconsin judges vote, like Fort Worth. We're not talking about a sliver of the richest Dallas suburbs, northern suburbs. We're talking about Fort Worth, Texas.
Yes.
And you got Fort Worth and the northern suburbs switching like that. That is all too projectable. But J-Mart, here's the thing again that I just don't understand. It's all too predictable.
She lost by 14 points in a district he won by 17. That is a swing of 31 points toward Democrats. 31 points in Texas. In suburban Fort Worth, in a district that has been painted Republican red since before many of the voters casting ballots were even born. And when reporters asked Trump about the result afterward, the man who had called her a true MAGA warrior, the man who had personally campaigned for her through social media in the closing days, looked at the cameras and said 4 devastating words.
Like, we got this going on in Minneapolis still. Americans getting gunned down in the street. You got wars all over the place, or the possibilities of war. The president trying to get $10 billion from his own government. You got these Epstein files dripping and like, this is just, for Republicans, a nightmare. Yeah. And they're not doing anything about it. They are walking over the cliff.
Right, sleepwalking over it, actually. I said 3 weeks ago that the immigration raids were motivating the left and alienating the center. And fast forward 3 weeks ago to last Saturday, and you look at this district in Tarrant County, and our kiddo went to TCU, go Frogs, so we know about Fort Worth. This district is the perfect confluence of what the Republicans' challenge is, Joe. It's a district made up of a lot of Republican suburbanites and a lot of Hispanic voters, because it's basically the north side of Tarrant County. And so you get Hispanic communities and you get a lot of upscale Republican communities. They're basically Republicans.
I was not on the ballot, just like that. A clean break, total disavowal. He was all over that race until the moment his candidate collapsed. And then suddenly he had nothing whatsoever to do with it. That response tells you everything you need to understand about what is actually happening inside the Republican Party at this moment. And it is far more revealing than any angry outburst.
But when they're given a lackluster Republican and a good Democrat who's an Air Force veteran who works for Lockheed, which in Fort Worth, it's kind of like working for GM in Detroit. Yeah. And they have this incredible motivational force, which is the images they're seeing on their phone and their TV screen every day. Well, guess what happens? The Democrats going to win, and going to win significantly. Mm-hmm. And look, there's a lot of districts around America that are very similar to this in the U.S. House. Significant population of Hispanic or Asian voters and a lot of suburbanites who are in the political center. If you can't win those demographics, you're not keeping the House this fall. Period.
Yeah, and of course, if you're a Republican, you've got to be looking at this and saying, well, the tragedy is we made inroads with Hispanics that we haven't made since George W. Bush.
They're gone.
And they're gone. They are gone. Young voters gone. It's been destroyed this year by these immigration policies mainly. They're gone. And Jonathan Lemire, it didn't have to be that way. But that's the path the White House and Republicans, by extension, have taken. And we're not just talking about a district here. You look at the numbers out of Texas.
Could ever be. Let us be perfectly precise about what we are describing. The headline captures the political fury and mounting terror consuming Republican circles right now. But Trump did not physically stand behind a podium and shriek into a microphone until his voice cracked. What he did was something that exposes his political vulnerability far more nakedly than a screaming fit ever could. He deflected, he distanced, he ran away from a race he was visibly and vocally invested in right up until the votes were tabulated.
Like, you look at the swing out of Texas statewide, and we, of course, because I'm a nice guy, I tried to warn Republicans with the Texas redistricting, and others did too. If you try to trim too close to the bone and you take a 20-point district that's a Republican 20-plus district, and you try to shave it into like 3 7-point plus Republican districts, in good years, good news. But John Lemire, in bad news, what you actually cause is the opposite effect. And you lose, instead of winning that one seat, you lose those 3 seats that you've created. And so if you look, and some people projected it out, if we continue going in this direction, you've got Republicans getting hammered in the state of Texas.
Yeah, they diluted those strong Republican strongholds there in Texas. And look, we obviously are a long way from November, but there were a lot of Republicans the last few days who have started to second guess some of these redistricting decisions. And this is a thunderclap. It's a local race, but it matters. And to what you were just saying with J-Mart, Black and Latinos, the gains that the Republicans made there, gone. Young voters, gone. Also, we've seen polls in recent days about how even Republicans, like hardcore Republicans, part of the Trump base, might be abandoning him, at least for now, over this. And we've also seen no real shift from the administration. Yes, Tom Homan went to Minnesota. Yes, he said he would talk to the local government there. Well, then he was immediately contradicted by the president, who says there won't be a drawdown in Minneapolis. You know, he continues to bash the local officials. You know, he posts over the weekend about, well, we won't send law enforcement unless they ask us to, you know, but we'll see if they have to say please. But it's unclear what that means. And there's no sign, and we just saw that video, no sign that ICE operations have abated anywhere. And John Heilemann, as Republicans dig in.
And that deflection, that instantaneous pivot away from a contest he had fully embraced, communicates more about Republican fear heading into the midterm cycle than any poll or pundit prediction possibly could. Because the people who cannot deflect are the Texas Republicans who actually have to run in these suburban districts when voters return to the polls. They are not saying, I was not on the ballot. They are saying, this is a wake-up call. They are warning that their voters cannot take anything for granted. Behind closed doors, they are using words that chill the blood of anyone who understands electoral math: wipeout, blue tsunami, catastrophe. These are not the words of confident politicians secure in their positions. These are the words of people who have seen the internal numbers and understood exactly what a 31-point swing in supposedly safe territory portends for their own political survival. And the chasm between Trump's public deflection and his party's private terror, that chasm is widening every single day. Here are the cold, hard facts on the ground. The Texas Senate District 9 special election runoff pitted Democrat Taylor Remit against Trump-backed Republican Lee Watkins. The district encompasses suburban Fort Worth in Tarrant County, precisely the kind of territory that once formed the absolute backbone of Texas Republican politics. College-educated suburban homeowners, professionals with careers and families, people who vote reliably and show up for special elections even when the stakes appear purely local. Trump captured this exact district by 17 points in the most recent presidential election. 17 points. That is not a swing district. That is not a place where competitive elections happen. That is Republican territory so deeply red that the party never needed to devote serious resources to defending it. And Taylor Remit won it by 14 points. 14 points in the opposite direction. From plus 17 Republican to plus 4 Democrat in the identical geographic area within a matter of months. That 31-point swing is not a rounding error. It cannot be dismissed as a turnout anomaly or a uniquely weak candidate or some obscure local scandal that nobody beyond the district boundaries understands. It represents a massive movement of actual voters abandoning the Republican brand in a location where that brand was supposed to be untouchable, impregnable, the floor beneath which Republican support simply could not fall. And everyone inside the Texas GOP who is paying genuine attention understands precisely what it signifies, even if they are not yet willing to articulate it publicly into microphones. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, one of the most powerful and deeply connected Republicans in the entire state political apparatus, called the result a wake-up call. He stated flatly that Republican voters cannot take anything for granted. Other Republicans, speaking privately rather than attaching their names to their assessments, described the outcome in considerably starker language: wipeout, blue tsunami, genuine existential anxiety about what arrives when the midterm elections finally come around if the party proves incapable of repairing its relationship with suburban voters before November. Ted Cruz, who faces his own Senate contest and who is not exactly renowned for publicly criticizing Trump's policy agenda, has already been sounding alarms that Trump's tariff obsession could trigger an electoral bloodbath if it inflicts serious damage on Texas's energy and export-driven economic engine. And now Senate District 9 sits directly atop those warnings like a blazing red emergency beacon that no one in the Republican establishment can afford to look away from. Because if a 31-point swing can materialize in suburban Fort Worth, in a district Republicans have owned for more than 3 decades, in a special election where MAGA turnout should theoretically have been elevated, then the mathematical equation for the midterms begins to look genuinely terrifying for the Republican Party at every conceivable level. And no quantity of "I was not on the ballot" deflection is going to make that mathematical reality disappear. Let us examine the actual mechanics of what transpired in Senate District 9 to genuinely comprehend why why this result carries such enormous significance and why it is transmitting authentic shockwaves through the Republican Party at the national scale, you must understand who populates this district, how they have voted across decades, what shifted this time, and why the shift occurred so rapidly and so dramatically. A 31-point swing does not materialize from nothing. It does not emerge because of one flawed candidate, or one poorly executed campaign, or one unfortunate news cycle. It materializes because something authentic and structural is shifting beneath the surface in how voters are evaluating their choices, in how they are experiencing the party they have supported for their entire adult lives, in the specific calculations they are now performing about their own economic futures and their own communities. And once you comprehend what is propelling that shift in suburban Fort Worth specifically, you begin to grasp why Republican strategists are surveying the remainder of Texas and observing identical conditions accumulating in district after district across the entire state. Begin with the geography, because geography carries more weight here than most observers recognize. Tarrant County, where Senate District 9 resides, houses Fort Worth and its immediate surrounding suburban communities. It ranks among the largest counties in Texas by population, and it has historically functioned as one of the most dependably Republican large counties in the entire state. For decades, Tarrant County served as the essential counterbalance to Dallas County as Texas Republicans labored to secure the suburban Dallas-Fort Worth corridor against Democratic encroachment from the urban core. It was the county that balanced the ledger. The county Republicans counted upon to generate margins when other portions of the metropolitan region drifted away. And now that very county just produced a 31-point swing toward a Democrat in a race that Trump personally attempted to prevent from yielding precisely that outcome. The geography of this defeat is not incidental. It constitutes the entire point. Because if Tarrant County is shifting, if the counterweight itself begins tipping in the wrong direction, the complete suburban Dallas-Fort Worth calculation for the midterms transforms entirely. Now consider who actually moved. The demographic narrative inside Senate District 9 is identical to the story that has been accumulating in suburban America for years, except now it is accelerating at a velocity that has caught Republican strategists genuinely unprepared. College-educated voters, and particularly college-educated women, have been steadily drifting away from the Republican Party in suburban districts for several cycles. The midterms demonstrated it. The subsequent presidential election demonstrated it. The following midterms demonstrated it across numerous suburban districts and states that Republicans assumed they would hold without difficulty. Then came the most recent presidential contest, and Trump clawed back sufficient suburban support to secure the national outcome. Republicans persuaded themselves that the suburban drift represented a temporary aberration that had been successfully corrected. They convinced themselves the MAGA realignment was fully accomplished, that the suburbs had returned home, that the coalition had stabilized. Senate District 9 just informed them, loudly and with painful specificity, that none of that assessment was accurate. The suburban drift was not corrected. It was merely paused. And whatever mechanism paused, it is no longer functioning. The drift has returned and it is moving faster than it was previously traveling. Here is what is propelling it. And this is where the narrative becomes most essential for comprehending the national implications. Texas operates as an energy and export-driven economic engine at its fundamental core. It depends upon international trade, upon oil and gas markets that respond to global economic conditions, upon agricultural exports, upon deep manufacturing and supply chain relationships with Mexico constructed over decades. And Trump's tariff agenda, the sweeping across-the-board import taxes he has been imposing upon trading partners including Mexico, is generating authentic and specific economic anxiety throughout Texas in ways that transcend abstract policy debates. These anxieties manifest in actual business costs that real business owners in suburban Fort Worth are experiencing at this moment. They manifest in supply chain disruptions affecting companies whose employees reside in these suburban districts and cast ballots in these elections. They manifest in conversations occurring at chambers of commerce and farm bureaus and small business associations regarding whether the economic trajectory of the nation is heading toward outcomes that damage the Texas economy specifically. And they manifest in the calculations voters perform when they enter a voting booth and determine whether the party they have always supported continues working for their interests. Ted Cruz has been issuing public warnings about this dynamic, which carries weight because Cruz does not typically deviate from Trump on economic policy matters. When a Texas Republican senator begins publicly cautioning that tariffs could produce an electoral bloodbath in Texas, that signals the economic anxiety is authentic and it is reaching the Republican base in ways that cannot be managed through messaging adjustments alone. Then there exists the cultural dimension, because economics by itself still does not completely account for 31 points. There is a deeper and more persistent transformation occurring around what the MAGA brand represents culturally to the specific voters who inhabit these suburban Texas communities. These are communities constructed around public schools that residents care about intensely. They are populated by college-educated professionals, attorneys and engineers, and healthcare workers and business owners who value institutional integrity, courts, universities, a free press, the type of institutional infrastructure that enables civil society to function and upon which people with professional careers and children enrolled in public schools depend every single day. And Trump has been relentlessly attacking every single one of those institutions since returning to office. Every instance of him labeling federal judges as criminals, every attack upon a university, every threat that human rights organizations characterize as describing potential atrocity crimes, every assault upon a broadcaster or threat to revoke a media license. Each of those moments exacts a genuine cost in these communities. With the hardcore base, the base remains and the base stays energized. But with persuadable suburban voters, the ones who cast Republican ballots for 20 or 25 years, and began experiencing genuine discomfort and are now quietly reassessing what the Republican Party has transformed into and whether they still recognize it, the erosion continues. In Senate District 9, sufficient quantities of those quiet reassessments accumulated into a 31-point swing. That does not materialize in a single week. That represents the product of months of gradual deterioration, finally crossing the threshold and appearing in the vote totals in a manner that no one could dismiss or rationalize away. Let us examine what Trump's response actually reveals about his awareness of the problem. Because the "I was not on the ballot" line merits serious scrutiny as a piece of political intelligence. Trump endorsed Lee Watkins. He designated her a true MAGA warrior. He transmitted multiple messages in the final days preceding the election, specifically urging his supporters to appear and vote for her. He was publicly and visibly invested in this contest right up until the votes were counted. And then when she lost by 14 points, he informed reporters he was not on the ballot. Consider what that response exposes. A politically confident president, a president who genuinely and completely believed his endorsement remained a potent asset in suburban Texas, would not abandon a race he lost with such velocity. He would do what experienced politicians do following an unexpected defeat. Point to local factors, discuss candidate quality, mention turnout mechanics, locate some explanation that accounts for the result without conceding that his personal brand functioned as a drag on the ticket. The fact that Trump's immediate instinct was to establish maximum distance between himself and the outcome as rapidly as humanly possible, to declare "I was not on the ballot" before the votes had barely finished being tabulated, suggests something significant. It suggests that even within Trump's own political operation, there exists a growing recognition that the MAGA endorsement no longer constitutes a guaranteed asset in suburban races. That it is becoming a variable campaign strategists must evaluate carefully. And that recognition, even if it never receives public expression beyond deflection, marks the beginning of an extraordinarily uncomfortable internal reckoning for the Republican Party regarding what the midterms actually resemble. A 31-point swing in a district Trump captured by 17 points is not a localized anomaly. It represents a structural signal emanating from precisely the voters Republicans cannot afford to continue hemorrhaging. Senate District 9 is suburban Fort Worth. College-educated homeowners, historically dependable Republican voters who have been delivering victories for the party for 3 decades without interruption. The type of district that is supposed to constitute the floor of Republican support in Texas, not a venue where competitive elections occur. A 31-point swing materialized there regardless. From plus 17 Republican to plus 4 Democrat in under 6 months in the identical neighborhoods with the identical fundamental voter pool. That variety of movement cannot be explained through candidate quality or local issues or turnout differentials. It reflects something authentic and structural shifting in how persuadable suburban Texas voters are evaluating the Republican brand at this moment. And the critical characteristic of signaling signals from suburban special elections is that they function as leading indicators, not trailing ones. They appear in off-cycle races before they manifest in general elections. They reveal what is approaching before it arrives. And what Senate District 9 is communicating loudly and specifically is that the conditions for substantial Republican losses in suburban Texas exist presently and are not dissipating before the midterms arrive. Trump's "I was not on the ballot" response carries more political significance than any enraged statement he could have delivered, and Republican strategists understand precisely what it signifies. This is a president who committed fully to this race publicly, named the candidate, called her a true MAGA warrior, transmitted voter mobilization messages in the final stretch, and then established maximum separation between himself and the outcome the instant it arrived. That is not the conduct of a politician who believes his brand retains strength in this category of district. That is the conduct of a politician who recognizes on some level that his endorsement may have worsened rather than improved the situation, and who is attempting to exit the frame before anyone initiates questions about what the result indicates regarding his coattails in suburban America heading into a midterm cycle. The Republican candidates who must compete in these districts watched that response and absorbed its meaning. Some of them are already performing private calculations regarding whether a Trump endorsement assists or damages their specific races. That calculation, occurring quietly in district offices and campaign strategy sessions across suburban Texas, represents one of the most politically consequential developments that Senate District 9 set in motion, and it is a calculation that yields no favorable answer for anyone within the Republican Party at present. The economic anxiety propelling this result is authentic, documented, and expanding. And Ted Cruz's tariff warnings demonstrate the Republican establishment already comprehends this. Cruz has publicly cautioned that Trump's tariff agenda could trigger an electoral bloodbath in Texas due to the state's dependence on international trade, energy exports, agricultural exports, and manufacturing relationships with Mexico. Those are not talking points harvested from Democratic opposition research. Those are warnings from a Texas Republican senator regarding what is occurring to his own state's economy under his own party's president. And the voters in Senate District 9, the suburban homeowners and business owners and professionals who have been observing their costs escalate and their supply chains deteriorate, may have just forged a very direct and very personal connection between the MAGA economic agenda and the economic pressures they are experiencing in their own lives. That connection between federal policy and personal economic reality ranks among the most powerful forces in electoral politics. And if it is generating 31-point swings in suburban Fort Worth, it is almost certainly accumulating pressure in suburban Houston and suburban Austin and suburban San Antonio and every other Texas metropolitan region where identical economic conditions exist and identical demographic trends are unfolding at this moment. The midterm House map is where this narrative becomes genuinely national in its implications, and what Republican leadership in Washington is quietly losing sleep contemplating. The current House Republican majority is extraordinarily narrow enough that forfeiting a small quantity of suburban seats in Texas alone could transfer control of the chamber to Democrats. And if Senate District 9 previews what competitive suburban Texas resembles in the midterm, with 30-plus point swings in districts Trump captured recently and comfortably, then the seats Republicans have presumed are secure in the suburban Dallas-Fort Worth corridor and suburban Houston, and the other major Texas metropolitan regions may not actually be secure at all. Texas Republicans have historically depended upon their suburban strongholds to supply margin and buffer against whatever losses they absorb in more competitive districts. If those strongholds begin behaving like Senate District 9, if the buffer erodes, the path to retaining the House becomes extraordinarily difficult, and the path to expanding the majority essentially evaporates. Dan Patrick, characterizing Senate District 9 as a wake-up call, is diplomatic phrasing for what is actually a catastrophic warning inside the Texas Republican Party. And the National Republican Party is monitoring the identical numbers and conducting the identical conversations because Texas is supposed to be the foundation, and foundations are not supposed to generate 31-point swings for the opposing party. Here is the fundamental reality. A Democrat just captured a Texas state Senate seat that Republicans had controlled unsettled without interruption since 1991 in a district Trump personally carried by 17 points mere months ago, with a 31-point swing that astonished even the most optimistic Democratic strategists in the state. Trump endorsed the Republican candidate, branded her a true MAGA warrior, transmitted last-minute voter mobilization messages on her behalf, and then informed reporters he was not on the ballot the moment she lost by 14 points. Texas Republicans are privately employing terminology like wipeout and blue tsunami to characterize what they fear is accumulating for the midterms. Ted Cruz is on record cautioning that tariff-driven economic damage could cause an electoral bloodbath across Texas. And the suburban voters who delivered this result, college-educated, economically anxious, professionally invested in the institutions Trump continues attacking, are the exact same category of voters who determine competitive House races in suburban districts across the entire nation. Senate District 9 constitutes a single data point, but it is an exceptionally loud one. It originates from a location where it was not supposed to be possible. And it is articulating something the Republican Party desperately does not wish to hear heading into the most consequential midterm cycle in years. The suburban fortress is cracking, the foundation is shifting, and what comes next will not be contained to Texas.